Hey everyone, I'm going to give a movie review of The Free State of Jones starring Matthew McConaughey. Movie was released in 2016, directed by Gary Ross. Movie had a rating of R for disturbing graphic images, brutal battle scenes. It was pretty gory. One of the more graphic Civil War movies I've seen. So as you can see here, kind of been trending up lately on IMDb. Has kind of like a middle score rating, but down here you can see it won a few awards. So for the awards that it won, not too many mainstream awards, but the BET Awards, Black Entertainment Television, did honor Mahershala Ali for Best Actor. Rotten Tomatoes has a cool score system in which you can see the critic score, the 48%, and the audience score, 64%. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy between the audience and the critics. In short, the movie begins in 1863, Mississippi. Farmer Newt Knight serves as a medic for the Confederate Army. Opposed to slavery, Knight would rather help the wounded than fight the Union. After his nephew dies in battle, Newt returns home to Jones County to safeguard his family, but is soon branded an outlaw deserter. Forced to flee, he finds refuge with a group of runaway slaves hiding out in the swamps. Forging an alliance with the slaves and other farmers, Knight leads a rebellion that would forever change history. These photos, alongside the real-life actors of Rachel and Newt Knight, are historical evidence. They did want to be pretty historically accurate, so they used similar characters. Another example of historical accuracy in the movie is the inclusion of the deemed 20 Negro law, in which the law specifically exempted Confederate military service from one white man for every 20 slaves that were owned in the family. This essentially put a wedge between the wealthy and the poor in the Confederacy, and on October 1862, after the Confederate defeat at Corinth, Knight and many of his men fled to the Piney Woods area in Mississippi in order to desert the Confederate Army. In the backdrop of the movie is another historically accurate representation of the time. 85 years after Newt Knight left the Confederate Army, his great-grandson appears, Davis Knight, who looked white and claimed to be white, was tried for the crime of miscegenation in 1948 after marrying a white woman. You can see her right there. The trial was a study in Mississippian absurdity, paradox, contradiction, and racial obsessiveness. A white man was convicted of being black. The conviction was overturned, and he became legally white again. Some background research was done on the movie by author Richard Grant, who went to the area of Jones County and was able to interview some of Newt Knight's distant relatives, including these two women. Dorothy Knight Marsh and Florence Knight Blaylock are the great-granddaughters of Newt and Rachel. After many decades of living in the outside world, they're back in Soso, Mississippi. That's where Newt eventually moved his family. They're still dealing with prejudice from all directions. The worst of it comes from within their extended family. According to them, they have close relatives who won't look at them, including being mistaken for other races. I found it cool too that the movie incorporated written context for the viewer, and they do this in a few clips here. These clips allow the viewer to get a little bit of additional context to the times that are happening. I feel that by making this small gesture to the viewer, it does help bring everyone onto the same page as to what is happening historically. And it leads into a period of time that I've not seen represented too much in film outside of Lost Cause mythology, and that's the Reconstruction period. So here in stage 2, we'll take a little closer look at the construction of memory in the movie, in which you see tropes like not fighting for Cotton instead of fighting for honor. Some of the movie is seen in more of like a sympathetic view towards the Confederacy. Knight is a medic, and he does tend to the wounded, and you get to see the gruesomeness of the Civil War hospitals. Another trope that the movie kind of goes through can be seen kind of in this picture, which would be like the white savior, Newt Knight. In fact, one film critic from the Washington Post said that the director Ross has insisted that he didn't want Free State of Jones to become another white savior movie, but that's precisely what it is, especially during scenes when the murderous injustice of slavery is refracted through Knight's frustrated tears. So I can see where the white savior trope comes from. There definitely are scenes that give that feeling, but there definitely are some aspects of the movie that look beyond just the white savior. There was a coalition of black and white soldiers who disagreed with Confederate policies, and even post-Civil War, Newt Knight did work with Reconstruction efforts and Freedmen's Bureau in order to, fight for a better America for African Americans. Another aspect of the Richard Grant article that companions the movie is that Richard did go and talk to locals in order to get their memory on it. And one local in particular, John Cox, he's a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. He's definitely critical of the movie. In fact, when Richard went to meet him, he describes Cox as an animated 71-year-old radio and television announcer with a long white beard. He had tons of Confederate memorabilia. He's actually working on his own movie called The Free State of Jones, The Republic That Never Was. And he goes on to talk about Newt. He says that Newt is what we call trailer trash. I wouldn't have him in my house, and like all poor white ignorant trash, he was in it for himself. Some people are far too enamored of the idea that he was Martin Luther King, and these are the same people who believe the war between the states was about slavery, when nothing could be further from the truth. So, people like Cox still believe in the lost cause. But then you also have locals like Joseph, who actually was an extra in the movie. He does have the kind of look of a soldier from the 1800s, but a very different view on the movie. And in fact, he says, when you grow up in the South, you hear all the time about your heritage like it's the greatest thing there is. He says, when I hear that word, I think of grits and sweet tea, but mostly I think about slavery and racism, and it pains me. Newt Knight gives me something in my heritage, as a white Southerner, that I can feel proud about. We didn't all go along with it. Now, I chose this picture to include director Gary Ross here, because I think he did a great job at trying to dispel the myth and the mythology around this story. He did his research. In fact, he went and spoke to Eric Foner at Columbia, who sometimes is known as the Dean of Reconstruction. And Eric Foner gave him so much to read. Ross would go back, read it, come back, and then Foner would give him more to read. So he studied up on the subject. And you can see that throughout the movie. There are absolutely true historical accuracies. I think partially why this movie should be remembered is it shows the direct connection between post-Civil War, Reconstruction era, and how 85 years later you have a trial like this in which segregationist laws prevented true civil rights and equality. I understand the various tropes that the movie engages in, white savior, lost cause, mythology, but if it does have one lasting impact, it should be that it recognizes that the Civil War didn't just end. There's a lot of complexities post-Civil War that still persist today and should be recognized.